We're here today to gather testimony. Chairman Thomas has put together a very aggressive schedule for the committee to take in this public testimony so that Pennsylvania will know from its citizens and from those who will be working with the federal government the cost and the protections that will be provided to the citizens of our Commonwealth. And again, I welcome you here to City Council chambers on behalf of the Mayor and President of the Council, Linda Thompson.
Thank you, sir. Let me acknowledge the Chair of House State Government Committee, the Honorable Babette Josephs. Just like to wave at everybody. And is Chairman Markosik here, Chair of the House Transportation Committee, but his staff is here, and we're glad to have them. Because this is one of those issues that intersect more than just one committee. And the four primary committees in the House that will be dealing with this issue: House State Government Committee, House Transportation Committee, Democratic Policy Committee, and the House Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. We have a statement that the President of City Council would like to enter into the record and has asked that we share these few comments. On behalf of Harrisburg City Council, I, President Linda D. Thompson, want to welcome you all this morning. The issue before us today is the potential impact of the Real ID Act of 2005. On behalf of my constituents, many of whom are elderly and poor, I want to make it known and enter it into the record that I have deep concerns about the negative impact this unfunded federal mandate will have on them. To that end, I support the position of the House of Representatives Intergovernmental Affairs Committee in opposition to this complex and potentially devastating legislation. If town hall meetings throughout the city to hear the views of the citizens themselves would be useful, I certainly offer to coordinate such efforts. President Linda D. Thompson. As Chairman of the House Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, I would like to welcome you to the first of several public hearings on the Federal Real ID Act of 2005. In May 2005, Congress enacted the Real ID law to address concerns regarding creation of fraudulent identification documents and terrorism. The Department of Homeland Security released final regulations regarding Real ID on January 11, 2008. Depending on million Americans, including over 9 million Pennsylvanians, the Act outlines nationwide standards for driver's licenses and identification cards used for an official purpose, which is defined as entry into federal facilities, boarding commercial airlines, and entering nuclear power facilities. Real ID is a federal law. The federal government, though, has allocated only $90 million to assist states with implementation of Real ID. Department of Homeland Security estimates that the cost to put Real ID in place will be about $3.9 billion. A study by the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, and the American Association of Motor Vehicles estimates that states will need to spend $11 billion over 5 years to meet Real ID requirements. Implementing Real ID will cause operational and fiscal challenges for Pennsylvania and our state government. The Department of Transportation estimated that Real ID will cost at least $85 million to implement in Pennsylvania. In order to obtain Real ID driver's license and identification cards, individuals will need to make in-person visits and bring documents such as Social Security cards, birth certificates, and proof of address to PennDOT. Renewing licenses in person will be extremely burdensome for people, especially the poor, the elderly, and individuals born in other countries, who may have a difficult time accessing personal documents like birth certificates. Although states are not required to implement Real ID, any state choosing to opt out of the act would cause a monumental inconvenience to residents. Residents who currently use driver licenses as their primary form of identification to board airplanes or to enter secure federal facilities would be unable to do so. They would be left using passports or some other identification to enter federal facilities. Pennsylvania residents, legislators, and other policymakers must take notice about Real ID. The act will disrupt lives of many Pennsylvanians and Americans. Legislators must educate the public about gathering personal documents needed to process Real ID cards and about implementation of procedures for renewing driver's licenses and identification cards. Residents also need a forum to voice concerns about the Real ID Act and regulations. These hearings are designed to educate legislators and other policymakers and empower residents about the possible impact of Real ID. We hope that participants at these hearings will learn more about Real ID and how the Act and regulations will affect Pennsylvanians. Some have even suggested that Real ID could cause major interference to that constitutional right that we all have, the right to travel from state to state. So the impact of Real ID can be devastating. And to that end, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this morning, and especially the people who have decided to come and provide testimony. We have heard from our stellar representative from Harrisburg and Dauphin County, Representative Ronald Buxton. Is there any comments that the minority chair would like to provide before we go into our testimony, our presenters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I join you on behalf of Chairman Adolph and the House Republicans in looking forward to the testimony, and thank you for scheduling the meeting here. Also, our thanks to the City of Harrisburg for providing the chamber. I also would like to thank one of my constituents, Michael Ham from the Mount Wolf area, who has made no less than 4 trips to Harrisburg to discuss this issue with me. And a number of his colleagues are also present here today. So with that, I look forward to the testimony, and thank you once again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there a representative here from the United States Department of Homeland Security? Okay. We will expect him very shortly. Pennsylvania Department of Transportation is Kurt Myers. Mr. Myers, would you like to start us off with your testimony? And each of you should have a packet which includes information on the committee and also includes a very good analysis of the Real ID Act. Mr. Myers.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kurt Myers, and I am the Deputy Secretary for PennDOT Safety Administration. On behalf of Secretary of Transportation Alan Beeler, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the Real ID Act of 2005. PennDOT acknowledges the concept and principles of the Real ID Act of 2005 and recognizes the fundamental importance of establishing the proper identity when issuing a driver's license or photo identification card. PennDOT is committed to enhancing the security of our products, processes, and facilities in a continuing effort to safeguard the integrity of our driver licensing and identification card systems. With this commitment, PennDOT recognizes the importance of maintaining the customer's expectation that personal data will be secure and privacy maintained. The REAL ID Act is a federal effort to enhance the integrity and security of state-issued driver's licenses and photo identification cards, which is intended to aid in the fighting of terrorism and further mitigating the risk for fraud. As you know, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security released the final REAL ID regulations on Friday, January 11, 2008. PennDOT immediately began an in-depth analysis of the 284-page document in order to identify potential options for Pennsylvania and the impact of those options would have on the citizens of the Commonwealth. This analysis has not been completed as of this hearing. However, I am in a position to discuss what PennDOT does today in regard to ensuring the integrity of the driver license and photo identification card issuance process and the security measures currently in place to maintain the privacy of customer data. I am also able to speak in regard to the REAL ID timeline as set forth in the final regulations, as well as some possible limited funding options should Pennsylvania choose to implement REAL ID Act. As background and fundamental to issuing driver's licenses and photo identification cards, Pennsylvania law requires that individuals must meet certain identity and residency requirements in order to obtain Pennsylvania driver's license and/or photo identification card. A U.S. citizen applying for a driver's license or photo identification card must present PennDOT with one form of identification, such as a birth certificate with a raised seal or a U.S. passport. In addition, the individual must provide 2 proofs of residency and his or her Social Security card. PennDOT performs 3 main electronic verifications, including verifying the individual's Social Security number with the Social Security Administration, verifying that the individual's driving privilege is not suspended in another state, and if the individual is moving from another state, verifying the validity of the out-of-state driver's license with the issuing state. A non-U.S. citizen applying for a driver's license or photo identification card must present PennDOT with a valid immigration documents based on his or her immigration status, a Social Security card, and 2 proofs of residency. PennDOT performs, when applicable, the same electronic verifications as mentioned previously. In addition, PennDOT completes an electronic verification of the INS credentials of those individuals who are not eligible for a Social Security card. All electronic verifications must be satisfactorily completed prior to the issuance of any product. In addition to these requirements, PennDOT conducts facial recognition checks to ensure the applicant does not have more than 1 driver's license or photo identification card already issued under a different identity. The facial recognition checks are an anti-fraud measure, which aid in further mitigating the risk of identity theft. As stated earlier, PennDOT takes the security of our products, processes, systems, and facilities, and the privacy of customer data very seriously. I am sure you can understand that I cannot discuss specific security features we have in place. However, at the highest level, the following are some measures PennDOT has implemented to enhance security and maintain privacy of customer data. Our driver's license and photo identification cards contain 3 levels of security: overt, covert, and forensic. Recently, PennDOT began issuing driver's licenses and photo identification cards with additional security features and a new overlay. In addition to the security of our products, managers and supervisors at PennDOT's 72 driver license centers have completed fraud recognition training, and we are in the process of training all driver license center employees. The training is focused on recognizing fraudulent documents, identity documents. Some additional security measures include initial name-based criminal history checks for all those employees responsible for the handling of confidential information and continued monitoring of the employee's criminal history. Those employees responsible for handling confidential information are also required to read and sign a confidentiality policy annually, with the understanding that if they breach the policy in any way, disciplinary action may be taken up to and including termination, and depending upon the severity of the breach, it could lead to law enforcement investigations. PennDOT also has a privacy manual which outlines the controls and measures we have in place to address the security and privacy of customer information and the responsibility of each employee to maintain the confidentiality of that information. All employees who are responsible for handling confidential information receive a copy of this manual. In addition to these safeguards, PennDOT has an Office of Risk Management whose responsibilities include the oversight of our security policies and the investigation of alleged misuse. I can assure you that PennDOT is and will remain committed to enhancing the security of our products, processes, systems, and facilities, and maintaining the privacy of customer data, regardless of whether Pennsylvania decides to implement the Real ID Act. In regard to the timeline set forth in the final Real ID regulations, it is our interpretation that the following chronology has been established. Effective May 11, 2008, only Real ID driver's licenses and photo identification cards will be accepted by federal agencies for official purposes, i.e. boarding a commercial aircraft, entering a nuclear power plant or federal facility that requires identification, unless the state in which the individual resides has been granted an initial extension by the Department of Homeland Security. Pennsylvania has filed for an initial extension in order to complete the analysis of the final Real ID regulations. And I just received notification this morning that that extension has been granted through December 31st of 2009. If Pennsylvania decides to implement the Real ID Act, individuals born on or after December 1st, 1964, approximately 4.1 million driver's licenses and photo ID cards, must have a Real ID driver's license or photo identification card by December 1st, 2014 for official federal purposes as defined by the final regulations. Individuals born before December 1st, 1964, or approximately 5.4 million drivers licensed or photo ID card holders, must have a Real ID driver's license or photo identification card by December 1st, 2017 for official purposes as defined in the final regulations. In regard to funding, currently Real ID funds are very limited. However, funds are available through a grant application process and or redirection of up to 20% of Pennsylvania's Homeland Security committed funds. In consultation with Pennsylvania's Office of Homeland Security, our initial calculation is that 20% equates to approximately $2.4 million. And that number could change. I just want to go on record for that. However, many of these dollars are already committed to other Homeland Security efforts in Pennsylvania. Grant programs that total $31 million and an additional $50 million are available for all states that are participating in Real ID. This is clearly a limited amount of funding considering the potential cost of implementing the Real ID Act in multiple states, the District of Columbia, and U.S. territories. On a related note, Pennsylvania has notified the state of North Carolina and the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators of its intent to participate as part of their grant application to the United States Department of Homeland Security for the development of Real ID specified electronic verification systems. However, and I want to be very clear here, our participation does not commit the Commonwealth to participate in Real ID. I can assure you that we are working as quickly as possible to complete our analysis of the Real ID final regulations, and we will be able to provide further details once we complete this analysis. This time, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, I think what I would like to do is to also hear from FEMA, because FEMA and PennDOT is working together. And then we will open up for questions. Is that okay with the members? Is that okay? So, is Mr. Comey representing FEMA? Okay, can we ask Mr. Comey to come up from the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency? You two, both agencies are working together, right?
Yes, PennDOT is the lead agency on this.
Mr. Chairman, for purposes of your hearing that does not have formal testimony, we are working closely with PennDOT to support their position, and we'll continue to work with them as this program moves forward. And we will be happy to answer questions if that's appropriate.
Okay. All right, then we can go to questions for both of you. First, let me introduce the distinguished members of the committee that's with us this morning. And let me start to my left with the Honorable Michael O'Brien from Philadelphia County. And then we have the Honorable Mike Fleck. We have the Honorable John Barrett. We have the Honorable Ron Buxton. And we have the Honorable Milne, the Honorable Perry, and the Chair of our Federal State Relations Committee, the Honorable Gillespie. I got it. And we have the Minority Chair of the House Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, the Honorable Dave Style. And I mentioned earlier another committee of the House that is going to be interacting or collaborating on this issue, the Honorable Todd Aegis, who's the chair of the Democratic Policy Committee, and Representative Mintz from the House Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. I mentioned the Honorable Babette Josephs, who's chair of the House State Government Committee. Did I overlook anybody? The Honorable Sam Rohr, who has a bill in our committee about real ID. We're glad to have him with us this morning. Now, did I overlook anybody else? If I did, charge me to put my head and not my heart. Just let me know that you are here and we will acknowledge you. At this particular time, let me start our questioning from my far left, the Honorable Michael O'Brien. Do you have any questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Representative Fleck.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Just had a question as far as your facial recognition checks. Do you actually compare, or you have a system that you can put facial IDs in, or it's not someone in the corner holding up pictures or something?
We have technology that we currently deploy at our driver licensing sites as well as on our existing database that has the capabilities, without getting into the technical aspects of it, that has the capabilities of looking at that digital photo and then comparing it against our database of pictures that we have on file and looking for potential matches. And I want to stress that it's potential matches. Once that occurs, a number of photos, perhaps two, perhaps more, will come out of potential matches. We then have human intervention to look at that raw data to see whether or not there are, in fact, any similarities perhaps in signatures, in addresses, and things of that nature, even though the names may be different. And it's then and only then, after we've done an exhaustive review of that raw data, that if we're not conclusive on the information, would we send it over to law enforcement for further investigation.
Now, if someone gets a college student or someone's trying to get into a bar with a fake ID, do you guys keep track of those? Are they just confiscated or anything, or is that one of the law enforcement aspect of it?
If they're fraudulent documents and they weren't through our system, no, we would have no way of tracking those.
Okay. Now, do you know if anyone at the Attorney General's office or anyone does keep track of fake IDs per se, or?
I don't know the answer to that from the standpoint of the Attorney General's office.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now move to the Chair of Democratic Policy, the Honorable Todd Aegis. Do you have any questions?
May I borrow your microphone? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There have been concerns from members about issues of confidentiality and privacy inside the request from the federal government to nationalize this process. Do you have any comment on Pennsylvania, on the potential outcome from your work as it relates to the issues of confidentiality and, identity theft potentially in this?
In particular to Real ID,
Yes.
the answer to that is that I believe very strongly that the issues of identity theft are growing. Those who, the criminal, are becoming very sophisticated in what they do and how they do it in an effort to take the identity of somebody else. I believe many of the items that I mentioned in my comments speak to the fact that PennDOT takes very seriously the protection of this information, but also taking whatever steps we possibly can to make sure that we create a document or a product that is difficult to forge. I believe that certainly many of the things that are identified in the Real ID Act, we currently do, because we believe they're the right thing to do from the standpoint of protecting the citizens of Pennsylvania, from the standpoint of creating a document that is difficult to fraudulently change or do something to. So, from the standpoint, you used the term, a national ID. I think from my standpoint, and looking at the Real ID process, for it to be effective, we need obviously to be able to communicate with other jurisdictions. We do that now. That's not something that is new. This takes it to, if you will, a level that we're not at this point in time, because right now we're checking for violations in other states. But Real ID says that we will have the ability to check in other states to validate that that person has an existing driver's license, Real ID driver's license, in a state that they're moving from. But that information, the intent of that is not to store that information on a centralized database, but simply to share information between jurisdictions.
Sure, let me just follow, Mr. Chairman, and I'll step back. And I guess my question to you is then, you really feel this creates a stronger level of tracking and compliance for the Commonwealth as it relates to documentation, and so you're making that case. You understand the arguments from the other side that there is some larger concern over privacy issues in this. We obviously, as we advance this process, we're going to have to balance those issues. But from the department's perspective, if you're making the argument here today that you really think this is necessary, because can you give me the reasons? Review the reasons one more time.
I want to clarify one thing: is that the department has not made a determination as of yet as to what recommendations we might have from the standpoint of participation in Real ID. We're still doing the analysis of the regulations. What I said earlier in my statement was that the department supports the principles of Real ID because of the fact that many of the things that the Real ID Act calls for, we are currently doing because we think they're the right thing to do, regardless of whether we participate in Real ID or not. So hopefully that
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Chairman Joseph.
Thank you. If Mr. Gillespie doesn't mind my hanging over your shoulder again.
Not at all, Chairman. But
Thank you. Thank you. I have two questions. One is kind of long, I fear, but the Real ID Act, as you know, requires the inclusion of each person's gender on his or her license. Many states and many municipalities recognize real challenges with transgendered individuals. Nothing in the federal government prevents, right now anyway, the states making their own procedures to deal with that challenge. So a preliminary question of mine is, what does PennDOT do when an individual whose present gender does not match his or her birth certificate when confronted by that person who wants a driver's license or a photo ID card?
I'm not aware of the specific answer to your question. I'll be happy to get back to you and to the committee with the specific processes that we follow.
Okay, I really would appreciate that. regulations, as I understand them, just released by the Department of Homeland Security, do not interfere with the state's ability to set up its own procedures for transgendered, and you're nodding to say that that's your understanding as well. But they don't, as I understand, in themselves have procedures for transgendered individuals. They allow the states to ask for a waiver. I am very sorry that the Homeland Security people are not here because...
They are here.
Oh, good. Thank you. What kind of... Sir, can you tell us your name?
Oh, Darrell Williams. I'm the Department of Homeland Security Director for the Real ID program.
Thank you. How you've announced that the states may apply for a waiver for implementation of the real...
Representative Joseph, I would like to hold up on questioning Mr. Williams until after he's presented his testimony.
Okay, I think then in that case, well, one other question then. I just heard to the PennDOT person, Mr. Myers. I just heard about a situation in Philadelphia with a home fire, where the people just walked out of the building that was burning with the clothes on their back, no papers, everything gone. Does PennDOT have any procedures to deal with situations like that, and could you outline them for us?
Yes, we do now, and I will point out as well, and Darrell can add to this as well, but the regulations as finalized for Real ID also allow for flexibility on the part of each jurisdiction to deal with a Katrina type of situation where people are forced to leave their properties without any time to search out documents and things of that nature. Certainly in the case of Pennsylvania today, we deal with these types of situations on a fairly regular basis where there are tragedies that occur where someone, in the cases you used as the example, where there's a fire and they need to get out. I don't know if this was in reference to the apartment complex that a few months ago, I guess, that there was one. And we actually sent down our emergency response vehicle that went down and was able to help individuals actually issue their driver's licenses, replace them. Because of course we have the digital photo on our record base, but we have specific procedures that we follow as far as validating who the individual is and how we go about that process. Because we clearly understand that there are times that things occur. And I will note as well that, again, within the Real ID Act, as the final regs, there is an exception process that simply needs to be documented by the jurisdiction to Homeland Security that says this is how you will do it, and then there's a reporting process that's associated with that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, one question which the answer will come later, I believe. I have no idea myself how to estimate how many transgendered individuals might apply for a driver's license. In your answer to me about those procedures, if you have an estimate, I'd appreciate having that as well.
It would have to be an estimate. My guess is that we do not keep that type of information. It's done but on a one-on-one basis.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and if I could come back up later, I would very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Myers, I'd just like to hear something else for me, if you would. On page 6 of your testimony, you indicate that effective May 11th, only real ID driver's licenses and photo identification cards will be accepted, for example, to board an airplane. And then on page 7, you say individuals born before December 1964, that's me, must have a real ID driver's license or photo identification to board an airplane. Where are we?
Well,
What happens in May of this year? Will I be able to get on an airplane
The
with
answer-
my current Pennsylvania driver's license?
the answer to that is yes, for two reasons. And the first reason is the fact that Pennsylvania has requested an extension, and as I noted earlier, I just received a letter actually from Darrell this morning via email that our extension has been approved. That extension goes until December 31st, 2009. So yes, your driver's license will be fine for being able to get on a commercial airlines, or if you decide to go to a nuclear power plant or a federal facility that requires a current ID, that will be good through December 31st, 2009.
So how do I understand the part of your testimony that indicates that people born before 1964 have until 2017?
Yes, the way that the regulations were finalized allows for a split in who is required, assuming that Pennsylvania were to deploy the Real ID Act. It splits the population into two. Those that are 49 and under as of December 1st, 1964 would be required to have a Real ID by December 1st of 2014. Those who were born after December 1st, 1964 would be required to have a Real ID by 2017. The understanding that we have is that this was simply done to ease some of the implementation pressure of trying to bring on nearly 9 million registered driver's licensing or ID cards over a 4-year period of time. It stretches it out over a longer period of time. And it is also, as I understand by reading the regulations, was done by some statistical analysis that suggests that those individuals who are over 50, from a statistical standpoint, based upon the analysis that the federal government did, were less likely to commit identity fraud, less likely to be involved in terroristic acts.
So am I to understand that when somebody goes to board an airplane from Pennsylvania after May 11th of this year, the TSA will know that Pennsylvania's been issued an extension under the Real ID and will accept people's driver's licenses for boarding an airplane?
I don't want to speak for Homeland Security. You might want to.
Yes.
So are we saying that TSA will have a list of states that are complying and those that have received extensions and those who may not be compliant?
Now, we work hand in hand with TSA really on a daily basis, so all the lists and all the updates, TSA will be provided to be informed as to which states have extensions, have applied for extensions, and have been approved for extensions.
See, my concern is the federal government has decided that May 11th of this year, certain identifications are to be in place. And if they're not in place, it's either that the states have received an extension from the federal government, have decided not to comply with the federal government, and what confusion that may produce to individuals whom need that identification for a number of purposes. The easiest one to expand, obviously, is boarding an airplane. And I'm hoping that people are not going to find on May the 12th that there is difficulty in boarding an airplane because they don't have some new federal identification that the feds have said should be in effect on the 11th of May.
Now, if I can, Representative Buxton, and I guess as we go through the other questions, we can clear this up. But it's my understanding that May 11, 2008, the clock starts to tick and doesn't end for all practical purposes until 2017. So the starting May 11, states that are compliant will have to begin some process of these standardized rules as it relates to licenses and non-licensed identification. So come May 11th, Pennsylvanians don't have to worry about boarding planes unless by May 11th, somebody in my case who has to renew their license in April. If by April Pennsylvania has not signed on, then I will not be able to be issued a this standardized license and therefore could be precluded from boarding the plane. But the point I want to make is that the clock starts at May 11, 2008. It doesn't end May 11, 2008.
Well, Mr. Myers, my information is that the federal government has established May 11, 2008 as the date that people are to have new identifications in order to board airplanes or for any other identification. Is that correct? Unless, I'll go there, but that is the date that they have set to implement the real ID as far as boarding airplanes and for other commercial uses.
The law, which was enacted in 2005,
Right.
gave 3 years for implementation. That implementation date starts May 11, 2008, and what that entails is for all states, there's an allowance of an extension for those states that wish to apply for an extension. They so can, and an extension will be granted to December 31st, 2009. For those states that choose not to apply for an extension, then at that time, they will have to have a state issue, and it's really a state issue, real ID compliant driver's license or identification card.
But just so that the public here understands, that 3-year period begins May 11th of this year.
That period begins
the
May 11th of this
2005
year.
Act.
And for boarding an aircraft, you only require a real ID driver's license if you choose to show a driver's license. If you choose to show any other credential that TSA accepts, you can use that in lieu of a driver's license. So you only have to show a real ID compliant driver's license if you choose to show a driver's license.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it was good to clear that issue up. Representative Gillespie. Well, sorry. Let the chairman go first, and then we will go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers, for your testimony. I have 2 questions. One, can you give us an idea of PennDOT's timeline in regard to, number 1, completing the analysis of the Real ID regulations, and following that completion of the analysis, how long before you would be able to make recommendations to this committee so that we can look at and move legislation which members may want to do?
Well, as you can imagine, going through this process, looking at the requirements from the standpoint of our facilities and what changes would need to be made, from the standpoint of our product, on what changes would need to be made. And as far as processes are concerned, those changes that would need to be made. This is an extensive analysis that needs to take place. The analysis is focused on 2 areas. One is, what's the impact to the customer by making these changes from the standpoint of process, products, facilities, things of that nature. And obviously, the one that is extremely important to all of us as well is the issue and the question of what it's going to cost to be able to implement this. So we want to do a thorough evaluation. Our hope is that we'll complete that within the next few months so that we have an opportunity then to sit down and to explore options from the standpoint of what and how we would deploy the Real ID Act, and the other question obviously being if. To answer your question, I would hope that in the next few months we'll be in a position to have completed that full analysis and also be in a position to be at the early stages of being able to talk about options, recommendations, things like that.
Thank you. I guess I would just urge the department to try and complete that work so that we can act legislatively within this session on the Real ID Act, because we have to do House and Senate and we have to get to the governor, and we really need to do that, I think, before we get into the next session, which could well put us beyond the extension date. So I think we need to make those decisions before that. Second question is, in my quick analysis of the regulations, it seems to me that as it affects Pennsylvania anyway, we have to worry more about the implementation and its guidelines rather than the actual mechanics of a Real ID license. Is that your impression also?
I would say from the standpoint of those process changes, that's an issue that we're looking at right now. For example, One of the requirements is that we do the photo up front, if you will. Right now, when you go into a driver licensing center, you come in, you present the documentations that we noted earlier, your birth certificate, social security card, identification as to where you live. And once all that's been vetted and you've been approved, we then send you to get your picture taken. In Pennsylvania, that's obviously then going to be a change for us if the photo is required up front. So we need to work through how that process is going to work, how it's going to impact our customers. We understand the reason for it. We think that it's a good idea from the standpoint of being able to capture the photo so that if someone comes in with fraudulent documents, we already have their photo on file, so that if we find that their documents are not acceptable and they run out the door, that we know that if that person comes back in, because of our abilities with the technology that I mentioned earlier with the facial recognition, we'll know that that person's been in before, presented fraudulent documents, and that will be one way of being able to stop that individual. The principle, again, the principles of Real ID we think are good, and we recognize those, but we have to work through many of those processes on how we would deploy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions, but before I ask the question, I'd like to correct the record. I inadvertently referred to Chairman Style as Chairman Adolph. I guess I had professional licensure on my mind and in my opening comments, so I'd just like to correct the record in speaking on behalf of Representative Style. As I also mentioned in my opening comments, I have some constituents here that have some concerns, and on their behalf, I would like to ask a couple of questions to Mr. Meyer. Since taking pictures, still or video of individuals violates some religious tenets of Pennsylvania citizens, does implementation of the Real ID Act not violate freedom of conscience addressed in Section 3 and Section 26 of Article 1 of the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights?
Well, I don't profess to be a constitutional expert when it comes to a question of that nature. I can tell you, however, that the Real ID Act allows for flexibility. There is nothing in the Real ID Act that requires every single individual within a state to be issued a Real ID product. The state can decide that individuals can be issued a regular driver's license. It just simply can't be used for getting on a commercial aircraft or the other two items that we mentioned. So in that particular instance, I think that really addresses the issue that you raised.
Again, I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire about being a constitutional expert, but a follow-up question to that. Does not the wholesale video imaging and biometric systems such as Face Explorer, facial recognition software, and other such systems being implemented by PennDOT through a private firm not violate Section 8 and Article 1 of the Constitution?
Well, again, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I will tell you that from the standpoint of issuing driver's licenses, I think you all know the law says that issuing a driver's license is a privilege. And when one comes and fills out all the forms and requests a driver's license or an ID card, they are giving permission from that standpoint for us to do the things we need to do from the standpoint of deploying our responsibilities as the Department of Transportation to issue a driver's license or an ID card.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That doesn't work. This one's apparently not working. So
Here, Representative Perry.
I got it. Secretary Meyer, thanks for your time and expertise. A few questions. Do you know if you can tell me how much involvement the state or the department had in the genesis of this plan, so to speak, from the start? Were we involved in all? Were we asked to participate?
I will tell you that, and I've known Mr. Williams, Director Williams, for a period of time now. Obviously, I quite honestly have never found a federal official who has made themselves more available than Director Williams has. He's done a great job in communicating. We don't always agree on everything, as I'm sure other jurisdictions don't. But the input that Pennsylvania has had has been twofold. One, directly through to Homeland Security, giving our thoughts through the comments that we submitted back in May of 2007. but also working very closely with the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, of which PennDOT is a member, which represents the jurisdictions throughout the United States, as well as many of the territories. They have worked very closely with Homeland Security as well. And I think, quite frankly, that many of the changes that you see in the final regulations are due to Homeland Security hearing many of the concerns that were raised by jurisdictions on those early comments that were made back in May of this year.
Okay, and just to be clear, that's May of 2007.
Correct.
But the plan was conceived prior to that. We're talking at that point kind of going to implementation. I'm wondering what input the department had, if any, or the state had, if any, in the crafting of the plan at the federal level.
From the standpoint of Real ID
Right.
itself, the Act, I believe that the Act came out of the efforts of the 9/11 Commission, and that's primarily the foundational.
Okay. All right. And just showing my ignorance here maybe, but I'm wondering, is there a tracking chip of any kind, RF, GPS, otherwise, in the federal plan, driver's license example, and or the state one as you currently move towards tightening up the system?
No, not in the Real ID.
Not in the Real ID.
There
How
is
about
some.
the state?
Pardon?
How about the states, in the state's own, even if they don't comply with Real ID?
Not in the states either. There is discussion, and you've probably heard discussions about WIDI, which is the program between Canada and the United States for the easy access of drivers across the Canadian border. And there is a chip that is in those driver's licenses, but that is not something that Pennsylvania is participating in.
Yeah, and I know you have to testify, and I apologize, but it's something that's not included in the Real ID driver's license plan, so to speak, at this point?
No check, no benefit check.
Okay. Then, and I've looked through your testimony, it looks like PennDOT's been pretty extensive in their security measures. Can you tell me, I know it's nearly a 300-page document that you just got a few days ago, what are the major differences in the actual license that you can tell us, if you can tell me now, between what Pennsylvania is currently doing, proposing, and what the Real ID?
Well, as an example, and as I noted in my testimony, Pennsylvania currently includes a overt, covert, as well as a forensic security features. Those are three items that are called for within the Real ID. So from that standpoint, I would think that we would already meet compliance with that. Now, of course, there's a certification that needs to be sent in to Homeland Security, but I would expect that would meet that requirement as an example.
Okay, one final question, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me. Do you know, I know we filed for the extension and been granted, is there any financial penalty at this point for non-compliance during that period, and what's the financial penalty afterwards if we choose not to comply?
Yeah, I think that, I agree there needs to be some clarification in that there is no financial penalty. Real ID, it is for the most part unfunded, and I know that is one of the discussions that has been over, again, a number of people have raised. Other than the grant monies that were mentioned, the $31 million plus the $50 million in grant money, plus the ability to be able to use 20% of the state's Homeland Security funds. But essentially, based upon the numbers that we've estimated, at one point in time we had estimated approximately $85 million. When the draft regulations came out, we thought that it would be even substantially higher than that. We don't know what the number is now, looking at the changes that have been made, and that's what we're working towards. But the issues associated with this being a mandate, Pennsylvania, as any other jurisdiction, can opt out. The downside to opting out is that the citizens of Pennsylvania would not have a Real ID for the purposes of getting on an airplane or into those federal buildings. But as Director Williams has pointed out, there are other documents that can be used.
Right, but no financial.
There is no financial penalty.
So Pennsylvania citizens have to decide whether they want to produce a passport to get on it, or other form of documentation to get on an airplane, or go to the federal courthouse. I doubt many are going to nuclear power plants on a regular basis. I don't see that necessarily a hardship. But Pennsylvania citizens have to decide whether they want to infringe upon their freedoms at that level or provide other documentation based on what you specified today. Correct. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here this morning. You led us through a number of standard operating procedures that PennDOT is already following in terms of issuing a driver's license. I think it's really helpful perspective to get a sense of how the system is currently operating. My question then is, what is it that would be the advantage to Pennsylvania of opting in or accepting the Real ID program, besides avoiding the negative of the potential inconveniences of Pennsylvania citizens? But beyond that, what is it that would make us want to get into Real ID? What would it do for us that we're not already doing or prepared to do as a state?
Well, I think that answer is better served at a point in time when we've done a full analysis of the regulations. I don't feel right now is the time to say that these are all the things that would be a benefit, because we have not had a full opportunity to be able to go through in detail and be able to go through each of those items. I can assure you, and another question was raised to ask us to move this as quickly as possible. I have a staff, individuals who are meeting on this issue on a daily basis, going through the regulations. This is certainly on the front burner. It is something that we clearly know that the sooner we get our analysis done, the better.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean, I understand that you've not had a chance to do that detailed analysis, and I certainly don't expect a chapter and verse synopsis of that situation. But just in the big picture vision, why would Pennsylvania want to go into this program?
Well, I think from the standpoint of security and those issues related to making sure that the one driver's license, one individual concept is to make sure that only one individual has that driver's license under that identification. We work very closely with other states, but certainly there is always room for improving those types of communications. As I said earlier, we've added a number of security features that are included in the Real ID Act, not because they were in the Real ID Act, but because we thought they were a good idea. So I believe, from a standpoint of looking at the big picture on a high level, that it's important that Pennsylvania, as it is for any other jurisdiction who is issuing a driver's license or an ID card, continues to improve the security features of the product, continues to improve how we protect not only our facilities, but as importantly, if not more importantly, how we protect the personal information of those individuals, and that we constantly look for ways to enhance that security. And I certainly, from the standpoint of many of the things that are identified within Real ID, again, as I said earlier, we certainly support the principles of Real ID.
Sure. And I appreciate the response and understanding of your situation as you work through the analysis. Just as Mr. Williams gets ready to testify, I would just raise the observation and I'm not challenging your explanation of where your department is. I appreciate what you're trying to do. But that's where I am trying to reconcile. I agree with the goals about the security, a couple other potential achievements we can accomplish through Real ID. But what I'm trying to reconcile is, and maybe Mr. Williams can enlighten us as he gets through his testimony, to be fair to him, is why we can't do that at the state level. Why do we have to potentially get into Real ID? I don't know what the advantages are. That's the gap that I am not seeing quite yet, and certainly would be open to being educated on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Let me acknowledge another member of the committee, the Honorable Bill Keller from Philadelphia County. Glad to have him. Time is running. We need to hear from Mr. Williams. The chairman has yielded to his members for questions. I haven't raised any questions, so what I'm going to try to do is to lay the concerns out that I have, and hopefully Mr. Williams can answer some of those concerns in his testimony. One, I'm concerned about what participation, if any, that Pennsylvania have in crafting the 2005 Act, which gave rise to Real ID. Secondly, I'm concerned about the growing population of elderly people and disabled people in Pennsylvania who will not be able to get to these photo ID centers or these limited locations to be processed. Thirdly, I'm concerned about what systems are in place, if any, to make sure that Pennsylvanians are fully aware of this new law and how this new law is going to impact them. Fourth, I'm concerned about what options, if any, are currently in place or can be put in place to change the law as it is currently drafted. I know that there is a new group of members in the United States House, some new members in the United States Senate, and I pretty much know that come January 20th of 2009, the same person in the White House, well, a person in the White House will not be the same person that is there now. So in light of that, what can Pennsylvania do? What can happen to change things? And my last concern would run to, it's my understanding that the extension that was requested and approved to December 31st of 2009 did not require an acknowledgement of compliance by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. At what point does the Department of Homeland Security say to Pennsylvania and all other states that you either have to get on board or let your residents know that things have changed? And on the funding side, will there be any more money for implementation? And how do counties have some say-so in in whatever system Pennsylvania or any other state plans to use and satisfy and compliant with the Real ID Act? So those are some of the questions that I wanted to raise to PennDOT and to Homeland Security, but let me officially welcome you to this great state and to the great Intergovernmental Affairs Committee of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Glad to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Darrell Williams.
Chairman Thomas and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss Real ID. As you may know, Real ID is based on a recommendation of the 911 Commission. It is a recommendation to help deter future terrorist acts that the Department of Homeland Security strongly supports. Further, one of Secretary Chertow's priorities for 2008 is secure identification. And Real ID is a core program with that objective. As we move forward this year, it is in the Department's hope that states will work in partnership with us on this initiative. On page 390 of the 911 Commission report, it states, secure identification should begin in the United States. The federal government should set standards for the issuance of birth certificates and sources of identification, such as driver's license. Fraud in identification documents is no longer just a problem of theft. At many entry points to vulnerable facilities, including gates for boarding aircraft, sources of identification are the last opportunity to ensure that people are who they say they are and to check whether or not they are terrorists. All but one of the 911 hijackers acquired some form of U.S. identification documents. The remaining 18 obtained 30 driver's licenses and state ID cards, and some fraudulently. A hijacker who crashed American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon, Hanoi Hanjo, had IDs from 3 states. Quite simply, driver's licenses provide terrorists cover to operate within the United States. The U.S. intelligence community knows that fraudulent documents are integral to a terrorist modus operandi. In fact, Muhammad Atta was an expert document forger trained by his superiors within Al-Qaeda, and the hijackers used a total of 364 aliases, including different name spellings. I'm happy to report that the department announced a final rule, Real ID, that took into account many of the inputs by states, driving down the cost by 73%, all the while maintaining the Homeland Security objectives we originally set out to achieve. The initial response to the final rule has been very favorable. As of today, 27 states, representing over half the U.S. population, have already requested extensions to work toward Real ID compliance, and more are coming. I would like to walk through a few different issues or issue areas with you, including requirements of the final rule and compliance guidelines, funding, DMV database connectivity, and privacy improvements in the rule. First, requirements of the rule. DHS recognized that despite a state's best intention, no one could be compliant by the May deadline under the proposed rule. Therefore, states have been given the option to ask for an extension through December 31st, 2009. During that time, a series of 18 benchmarks must be met. Attached to my testimony is a list of those, a list for your information. If states who have acted in good faith and have achieved the 18 benchmarks need a little extra time to become fully compliant, they can request a second extension until May 11, 2011. By this time, all states within the program must begin issuing fully compliant Real ID licenses. Another key element of the final rule, phased enrollment periods. Individuals born on or after December 1, 1964, desiring a Real ID for official purposes, will need to have the ID by December 1, 2014. All other persons will have until December 1st, 2017. This approach gets secure credentials to those more likely to use fake IDs while making compliance by the states easier. Approximately 40% of the U.S. population will have until 2017 to enroll, thus lowering the cost of the program substantially. As a result, states will not have to hire additional personnel or build additional facilities as projected earlier. Now, funding. As stated earlier, with the help of stakeholders like the legislators, DHS developed a final rule at 1/4 of the initial projected cost. The average increase in card issuance is about $8. So in Pennsylvania, with a 4-year license, that comes to about an extra $2 per year. Additionally, the department currently has a grant announcement open in excess of $80 million for Real ID funding for states. Secretary Chertoff is also allowing each state to use up to 20% of its Homeland Security grant funds for Real ID compliance. States truly wishing to be compliant should be able to find additional monies in these grant funds. DMV database connectivity. I'd like to start up front by saying Real ID is technically feasible. As you will see by the appended chart, and that's a systems connectivity chart, there's a widespread activity being undertaken throughout the country by states to improve their standards for issuing ID cards. 47 of the states and the District of Columbia are connected to the SSOV, which is a Social Security online verification database operated by the Social Security Administration. 28 states are signed up for SAVE, which is a systematic alien verification of entitlements, a DHS database, and most other states are entering into a memorandum of understanding with DHS to begin the process. In FY06, participating state DMVs ran 1.2 million queries against the SAVE system. 3 state DMVs and 10 vital record agencies are involved in a pilot with the National Association for Public Health Statistics and Information Systems to check birth certificates via the E, which is the electronic verification of vital events database. Approximately 85% of birth information dated back to 1935 is contained in this system. Finally, the State Department will be developing a system to permit DMV to electronically verify that a passport an individual presents the DMV has been lawfully issued. Work here is still ongoing, but we have been fully engaged with the states on this important matter. How does Pennsylvania fare with respect to DMV connectivity? Very good. Pennsylvania is connected to the Social Security database and is one of 28 states with an MOU to check with DHS for lawful status. Connection to the database with birth certificate records, I'm pleased to announce, is being paid for by DHS grant to all states. Returning to the issue of Social Security number verification, a state audit report from 2007 showed 27,000 people in North Carolina used bogus Social Security numbers when applying for a driver's license or ID card. About half these belong to persons that were shown as deceased in the SSA records database. I'm sure Pennsylvanians would not want their Social Security numbers used in a similar fashion, and Real ID will help ensure that it is not. Now, privacy. There have been concerns voiced about Real ID creating a national identification card and national database. These concerns are simply not true. The final rule maintains the existing practices of how information is stored, collected, and disseminated at the state and local level. The federal government will not have any greater access to information than it always does for law enforcement purposes. As for a national ID card, driver's license will still be state issued. The final rule even allows flexibility in card design and security features used on the card. At this time, I'd like to give you a line item by line item overview of the privacy improvements in the rule. Number 1, name history will not be stored in a machine-readable zone, which offers greater protection by not having additional personal information beyond what is on the face of the card and the two-dimensional barcode. Number 2, elimination of financial history check for DMV workers. Protects the privacy interest of DMV workers since their personal financial information is not exposed to their employers. It eliminates potential union and legal issues. Number 3, greater flexibility to suppress address space on state law or court orders. Provides greater flexibility for states to protect confidential information for protected classes. For example, domestic violence victims. Allows for display of alternative address if permitted by state. Number 4, states cannot fish for info into other states' database. Key measure to protect personal data from DMV workers. Prevents DMV workers from accessing information about people in another state without an authorized work reason, and provides for audit and accountability. Number 5, data security and access address. Use of personal information must be consistent with the Driver's Privacy Protection Act. Key provisions of this act are to ensure that personal information provided to the DMV is not misused by DMV workers and cannot be hacked by outsiders. Number 6, ability to redact birth certificate info. Protects personal information that is not necessary to establish an individual's name and date of birth. Number 7, privacy best practices to be published at the same time as the rule. Given states a roadmap for additional privacy measures to take that are not required by Real ID, but will enhance the privacy protection for the public. Number 8, issue third-party skimming of data clearly raised for state action. Raises a key privacy issue that was outside of the scope of rulemaking, so that states have options about how to address this issue. Number 9, consideration of encryption of MRZ down the road as technology improves. It ensures that future technology solutions can be used to enhance privacy without requiring DHS to go through a lengthy rulemaking process. Finally, let's take a moment to discuss a concern near and dear to the hearts of most Americans, identity theft. According to the Federal Trade Commission, there has been a 791% increase in reported instances of identity theft from 2000 to 2006. Now, Real ID will make it much more difficult for fraudsters and identity thieves from stealing your identity. Instead of countless Social Security numbers being used to create false identities, There will be one record assigned to a driver's license. Despite the loyal opposition led by the ACLU asserting that there will be rampant increases in identity theft, common sense prevails. There will not. Only in Washington can a program designed to enhance the authentication of identity documents be construed as leading to more identity theft. The opposition is advocating insecure identification, not secure identification. And secure identification, that is, verifying that the identity documents make it into the right hands or that persons are, in fact, who they claim to be before issuing identity documents. Equally, increased identity theft is a contradiction in terms. The Center for Identity Management and Information Protection, based in Utica College, conducted an analysis of Secret Service identity theft cases that revealed 35% of the time a fraudulent driver's license was used. Real ID will help combat identity theft, period. The Fraternal Order of Police supports Real ID, saying it's a public safety issue. Without secure identification, it places both the officer and the public he is sworn to protect in greater danger. The major county sheriffs association supports Real ID, saying secure and protected identification is critical in our efforts to keep our country and citizens safe. And most importantly, 82% of the American public say favor when asked what they think about new rules for issuance of driver's license designed to combat terrorism and identity theft. Public opinion strategy poll was cited in September of 2007. To echo the words of the 911 Commission, for terrorists, travel documents are as important as weapons. The National Intelligence Estimate from July provides a chilling reminder for the need to act now by concluding that Al-Qaeda was intensifying its efforts to place operatives inside the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to appear in front of this committee today. I would be delighted to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Are there any questions by the members? Representative Josephs is recognized.
I don't know where the best place to stand is. I'll pick on Mr. Gillespie again. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Williams heard my question to Mr. Myers. If you would let me know how Homeland Security is going to deal with individuals whose birth certificate gender does not match the gender that they appear to be.
For that particular issue, the way we've rewritten the rules to allow states maximum flexibility to handle issues such as like transgender. In regards to the gender identity on the actual credential itself, a lot of the recommendations for what should be on the front of the card to include name or any other identity information really came from a number of individuals that participated in the rulemaking process, but also provided input. Some of those were like law enforcement individuals, some of those were a number of privacy-oriented groups that participated, and a number of states participated as well. The recommendations that was given to Homeland Security, and the ones we had adhered to, was in regards to gender, is to have a requirement on the license of the card for the sake of identity purposes to help law enforcement but other individuals facilitate who the proper and rightful holder of the card is. However, how a state adjudicates the gender issue will be left to the state. And what we'll ask is, under this exceptions process, please give us written information as to how you adjudicate those issues.
Thank you. If I may ask, you were talking about the fact that people might use a passport or another form of identification for access to various facilities. How long will that leeway last? Into the future forever? Or at some point, do you anticipate the federal government will say, you must have a national driver's license?
Yeah, For me, of course, I'm the implementer of the rule as it stands today. What the future holds, I really can't predict. We have talked to a number of organizations, for example, individuals, and in some cases there's a lot of misinformation out in the community that suggests, for example, you'll need a real ID to establish a bank account at a financial institution. Well, that's not true. However, as we have talked to a number of other institutions, they suggest that they do cherish the thought of a more secure credential. A credential they have more faith in when a person presents it that it is who they say they are. So which action they may take, I'm not sure.
What you're saying then is if I don't have a federal driver's license to get into the federal court building in Philadelphia, and I am an attorney, I should say. I don't practice, but I do have reason to be there. I could bring my passport, assuming I have one, or a birth certificate, assuming I can find that. And you have no idea, really. We don't know right now, none of us know how long I could use that passport or that birth certificate and still get into a federal courthouse.
Well, two things. One, I would not say you can use the federal identification. This program is not a federal identification. States issue driver's license and ID cards. So it'll be a state's choice as to how they're going to manage, orchestrate, and issue driver's license or identity cards. In regards to the individual facilities, what types of forms of identification they require is still basically up to them. For example, there are a number of federal facilities today that do not require any type of identification whatsoever to enter. If they so choose in the future, it would be their choice as whether or not they have a requirement for identification card versus not.
Sir, the hammer that the federal government is holding over the state is your citizens will not be able to access certain facilities. They will not be able to get on an airplane without whatever we call this card. You have been saying that it's going to be okay to use some other form of identification. How long will that last? Do we know?
For example, today, and many people may not be aware of this, you can gain access to a commercial aircraft today with no identification whatsoever. You can subject yourself to what is called TSA secondary screening and present no ID card. But you must convince the TSA individual is that you're not a threat to anyone on that aircraft, and you're certainly, I guess, a reliable and standard and non-threatening individual. And they'll basically do a risk assessment. So there's no requirement today for an identification card.
Can we anticipate how long that lack of requirement will last into the future?
I can't predict the future.
Okay, so then we don't know. Thank you. If I may go to the topic of dollars, you mentioned the fact that this card license will cost $2 a year. Is that $2 a year the cost to the state? PennDOT to the state doing background checks, to the individual whose license fee, card fee may go up, or what is that $2 a year? Please be more specific for us.
And the $2 is hard cost to the states, approximately $2 more per card issuance for all the individuals within a state. How a state chooses to redistribute those costs would be up to the state.
So Mr. Myers.
I just want to add there that that's something that, although I realize that those numbers are in there and that have been presented by Homeland Security, clearly we have not finished our analysis of what the actual impact will be to Pennsylvania, and I want to be clear about that we need to do that extensive analysis on the cost, and we'll certainly be more than happy to share that information once we come up with it, but I just want to be clear that we have not finished that analysis of what the direct impact will be to Pennsylvania in reference to cost.
And when you do that analysis, are you going to include what it might cost the applicant, the individual citizen?
Yes, absolutely.
Actually, Mr. Myers makes a great point, and that's an average cost as we look at the 245 million potential drivers and ID holders across the U.S. landscape.
Well, the total cost, and I should say in the spirit of transparency and reform that I am a board member of the ACLU, and I thank you for mentioning us in your testimony, sir. What the ACLU understands is that about 180 million drivers will need these cards, and perhaps more people who want a card and do not drive, the photo ID, which we provide here in Pennsylvania, and that the regulations are going to cost $9.9 billion. So I can't do the math while I'm standing here, but if you divide 108 million into 9.9 billion, it's a pretty big number. And then if you divide out the number of people in Pennsylvania who might want a card or a license, then I think we're coming to a huge number. And if PennDOT is going to do that analysis, I would really appreciate that from that point of view. Thank you very much. Thank the chairman very much, the minority chairman, for letting me ask these questions. I'm not a member of the committee. Great courtesy.